Good morning, ladies. It is great to be talking to you this early on a Friday morning when right here in Montana, it's light outside at 6:15, and it is going to be a beautiful sunny day with warm sunshine. So, getting started here this morning, we are in the smallest book in the Bible today. It is small by the number of verses. Now, when we get to 3rd John, this is 2nd John, when we get to 3rd John, it's the smallest in terms of the word count. So both of these, 2nd John and 3rd John, are both very, very small. I'm not going to be able to do 2nd John in just 1 week. It's going to be a 2-part lesson. So let's get started. We have John writing this, and he does not identify himself like the same way he does in the first letter, but there's no question that it's John. You will hear a lot of repetition between 1st John and 2nd John, and so there's no debate in terms of who wrote this letter. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and read the first 6 verses, and then we'll take that apart and go forward. Verse 1, the elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. I rejoiced greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I was writing to you a new commandment, but the one we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you've heard it from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. Okay, so going to the very beginning, this elder, as we said, is John. And John is probably, according to what I've read, probably the oldest known Christian at all on the planet at that point in history. This would be in the 90s, in terms of that day and time when this was written, possibly AD 95, and he would be in his 90s, and at least he was the only known old Christian. And he is, the word elder, I know we think of the word elder in terms of the office of elder in the church, but in that day and time, it could be used for anyone of greater years and greater wisdom that are in a leadership role, not just in the church, but in the society at large or in the government. So it does denote some respect. But it is interesting, though, that here in our day and time, the idea of respecting our elders is not as much of a big deal as it once was. There's almost an attitude of devaluing our elders rather than valuing them. In some cultures, they are very much respected, but in ours, it almost feels like being irrelevant or even disposable. And actually, what we all hope will come with age is that we have wisdom. We've lived longer, and we have learned from life experiences, and so older and hopefully a little bit wiser. And I think about sometimes the wisdom that maybe I have not taken advantage of, maybe from my mom and dad, or other older people in my life. But now that I am older, I'm realizing, wow, I really do have a lot of life experience that could be shared. And thankfully, I do have the opportunity to share. But when I'm talking with someone that's a good bit younger than me, say my grandchildren, they'll say things sometimes, and it's all I can do to just hold my tongue and not start laughing at how silly some of their statements might be. Sometimes I get the opportunity to launch into some, well, let me tell you about this. But I try to understand and be patient with them. There are occasions, though, where I've been with younger women who have come to me and, have said something about their marriage being on the rocks, and their husband's a jerk, their husband's lazy, all these things, all these comments about them that are every single one negative. And I'm so hoping that she's going to ask me, what should she do about her marriage? And I want to have the opportunity to say, have you ever thought about your husband's good qualities? Do you realize you sound like you think that you're drastically superior to that man? And oh, by the way, you picked him. And so, those are the kinds of things that we learn over time. We don't necessarily know that going in to marriage. So let's talk for a second about who is this lady that he is addressing. He says, to the elect lady and her children. Elect could be also, the word chosen might be in your translation, and it would be just an identity of them as being Christians. Okay, the elect of Christ are those who have come to know Christ because he chose them before the foundations of the world. Could it be a specific woman and her biological children? I guess it could be. And some really do believe that it's a specific lady who has invited men and women and children to come and meet together in her home who are Christians. That could be the case. The children could be those who are younger in the faith, because we know that from the first epistle that is often how John referred to younger Christians in the faith as children. The idea, though, of lady could also be just a group of Christians who the Greek word there is in a feminine tense. So it could definitely be a group of Christians, young and old, but also it could be a person. And it really doesn't matter, because the intention there is that John knows them. He says, I love in truth. And so he knows them, but he also is making a point of highlighting this word truth. I don't know if you caught it when I was reading those 6 verses, but the word truth is there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. And yours might be a little bit different in your translation. But truth is very important here, because it's indicating that this group of people are committed to the truth of God's word. And he is saying that you know the truth of God. The truth abides in you and in us and will be with us forever. In other words, truth is not going anywhere. God's truth is timeless. There's sometimes people want to convince us that, well, God's word is no longer relevant, and God's truths were truths for that time and age. And now we have our own truth in our day and age, and that is not true. The truth that he is speaking of is the truths of God are timeless, and they will be with us forever. The social mores of today are what they are, but God's truth never changes. I love that he says to them, to these Christians, grace, mercy, and truth will be with us forever. He says it in verse 2 and again in verse 3. That speaks of John's confidence that he wants to communicate to these Christians, his confidence that God is eternal and that because of our relationship with God the Father through Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, we will be forever and eternally encased and wrapped in grace, mercy, and peace. Even when times are hard, grace, mercy, and peace are promised to us as we walk in the truth. He's using this idea of walking in God, walking in truth, walking in love several times. So we're going to get into walking in a little while. But I want to point out one thing that he says in verse 6 about walking. It's really a definition here of love. He says, and this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. So the definition of love, according to John and according to Scripture, is that love means we walk according to God's commandments. We love him, so we obey him. And we know it's what Jesus said as he was here. We can find it in the New Testament and the gospel writings, where Jesus is quoted as saying, if you love me, you will obey me. So love, if we remember in the first gospel of or not the first gospel, the first letter that John wrote, he gave us 3 tests of our authenticity as a Christian. Love, remember, love, obedience to the commands, and, obedience to the commands, and truth. And so those 3 things are indications, according to the first letter, that we are authentic, born-again believers. Whereas here, he is going to combine those 3 attributes in such a way that it's even simplifying it a little bit further and making it clear that all 3 of those are in tandem and are interrelated. So he says, just as you've heard from the beginning, this is the commandment, walk in love. All righty. I want to talk about this idea of truth and love. Going on to this idea of walking. In the Roman Empire, at the time of this writing, one of the things that explains the success of the expansion of the Roman Empire was its system of roads. And one of the results of the great travel system was a great communication system. So the gospel spread quickly because of that fact. But it also meant that the deception that was pushed by false teachers was able to spread quickly. So I want us to look at verse 7 to see what John is trying to communicate to them about this deception, because as we read 1 through 6, we see all kinds of confidence, all kinds of statements about how we can be so firm in our faith. And here he says in verse 7, he starts with the word for, which is telling us what is going before. Those 6 verses are important because of what he's about to say. All right, so what he's about to say in verse 7 is, for, or because, many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the antichrist. So watch yourselves, so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Now, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to go into this passage in much greater detail next week. But I just want you to know that there is a problem, that John is the reason he wrote this second letter. Okay, he is going to speak very clearly, and it's going to appear a little bit harsh in places, but I want you to know he loves them so dearly, and love means we will deal with the problem. And so John loved them too much to just let this pass. He wanted to confront them on potentially a slacking off of the importance of truth that might have been happening in that particular church. So as we were saying, deception was probably leaking into this Christian fellowship. The Gnostics were the main culprits, as we've already mentioned in other lessons, and this was the major problem that John was speaking of. It should be a major problem for us today. People who come in and want to explain Jesus in their own, according to their own understanding and own definition. And that is something that is nothing new. In that day and time, it was common to have that kind of deception going out, and John was famous for refuting it. But today, the information highway would kind of be a parallel to the system of roads, the Roman roads, that brought about great communication for the Roman Empire. And in our information highway, we have so many opportunities to communicate the gospel. But unfortunately, it can be used negatively, as we've all experienced. The something that's so amazing that we know God allowed that information to be put into operation because it was such a great tool of God. But as it has been used by God, it has also been used by the enemy. And I think there's something really wrong in a culture that uses these social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram in a way that, as a Christian, we've got to be careful about how we share our faith on the internet. There's a way to do it that is very endearing and positive and engaging, but there's also the temptation and the tendency to do it in a way that is very offensive and that pushes people away. And so I think that it's often used to tell our quote-unquote friends on Facebook what we think of them, give them a piece of our mind. And that is not loving. And we should be really careful that faith, that love and truth, and love of truth, and loving others with the truth, really it's so important how that relationship and that balance of those two things come together. I think about what kind of person I am. You know, am I a person who values relationships more than I value truth? Or am I a person who values truth more than I value relationships? And either one would be out of balance. Either one would be wrong. What I desire is to have a beautiful relationship with another person that is not afraid to speak the truth. And so that balance, I think of my younger years when I was a young mother of young kids, and I was so intent on of training them in truth and training them obedience, training them what was right and wrong. And I'm sure I overemphasized that rule keeping mentality to the expense of love. I think of, times when I was harsh with them because of my intense desire for them to understand the importance of obedience. Whereas if I had been the mom that was more about love, maybe I would have, when my child came to me with the idea of finger painting with grape jelly on the walls of the kitchen, I might have said, "Oh, sweetheart, yes, let's do that. I want to encourage your creativity. So let's do that. Come on, that's going to be fun." Those words would never have come out of my mouth, okay? But maybe they would some other moms, and so neither one of them, though, is necessarily the right thing to do. So there's a time to just let it all fly, but we've got to have a good balance in our lives and our relationships with other people so that we can make truth a priority based on a relationship that has been established in love. When John says to walk in love and truth, I want us to think about walking. Walking is the best exercise, according to the experts. It is so good for us. It's something we can do later in life. It's something that can be a lifetime of exercise. It doesn't impact the joints negatively. It's good for them, and it stimulates the heart muscle to develop and stay strong and healthy. And so walking is a wonderful, wonderful physical exercise. But also walking is something that John is telling us to do, walking in love and truth with each other and walking in love and truth with God. To walk in love and truth is a definition we looked at in back in the previous letter. Was it's a long obedience in the same direction. Okay, the idea of walking is not a sprint; it's a marathon, but a walking marathon, not running. And so we stick with it for a very, very, very long time. And in this case, until we die, if we have a relationship with God. A perfect example of that is Enoch in Genesis 5. If you take time, sometime, not right now, but at another time, read Genesis 5, because there are 10 generations that are mentioned here from Adam to Noah. And in the description, in that chapter, you have a structure that Moses used in describing these 10 generations, and it's very repetitive. Adam had such and such a son at a certain age, and then he died. And that's repeated over and over and over until you get to a man named Enoch. And it tells us that Enoch walked with God. And it tells us that after Enoch had, his first son, it mentions that, but it says that after Enoch had lived X number of years, he basically walked with God straight to heaven. He didn't die, which is just remarkable. And it really does picture for us what that picture of walking with God is something that we should think of doing, not just this week or not just during this season, but walk with God straight to heaven. Yeah, we don't get to go hand in hand with Jesus physically like Enoch did, but we are going to get to go walk with God spiritually straight to heaven. The only other one in that whole list, when it got to Noah, Noah did die, but Noah, it says that Noah walked with God. So none of the other, it doesn't even tell us that Adam walked with God, just Enoch and Noah. And I want to be a woman who walks with God. I want that to be my lifestyle of walking with God. Now, physically walking is one of my favorite things to do. I'll walk with anybody that'll call me and ask me, okay? But I do have a specific walking buddy. Her name is Teresa. And when we get together and walk, we accomplish so much. We unload. We get on the same page. We figure things out. When we're finished, we feel like we have fixed all the problems of the world, mine, hers, yours, everybody's problems. Although we have been known to pick up the phone and call each other as soon as we get home, or even on the way home because we forgot something. So the idea of a walk is exercise, but it's a lot more than that. And so I want to mention some things that are implied in walking. Micah 6:8 says, He has told you, O man, what is good and what God has required of you, and it's to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. Walking humbly with God means that we come to Him humbly receiving whatever He wants to give us. It's not just at my quiet time, it's all day long. To have a humble attitude with God as I communicate with Him throughout the day. Just like in my walks with Teresa, we are respectful of each other's conversations and the problems they want to talk about, and we listen humbly, and we receive from each other advice humbly. Amos 3:3 says, do two walk together unless they have agreed to meet? Well, actually, that happens every single time Teresa and I want to get together. We text or talk, either way, to agree to meet somewhere at a certain time. So we have agreement. We have a meeting of the minds. And the same is true when we walk with God. I must agree that I need to meet with Him every single day at a particular time for me, as well as all those other little pop-in times when we get together. But there must be agreement. I must agree with Him. I must surrender to His mind and His leading. Walking means results in, there's an implication here that there will be increased mutual affection and intimacy. And that is true of a friend that you're walking with. It's true of Teresa and me. But that increasing mutual affection and intimacy, it is going to happen when we walk with God. That is a promise. I mentioned exercise. The benefits of exercise, this particular type of exercise they're obvious. But as a spiritual obedience to walking, it's like as we walk and talk and share and submit, there's a muscle that's developed, a faith muscle. We're exercising that faith muscle as I daily and multiple times daily communicate and walk with God. It's a steady kind of growth. Another thing about walking is walking with another person implies safety. That because we're not walking alone, we're not as concerned about all those critters in the woods that could attack us. I know for sure that a lot of conversation and laughter when Teresa and I walk means that bears don't want to have anything to do with us. They're going to stay away. And so walking with God, same thing. It implies safety for me. As long as I know that God is with me, I have nothing to fear. Another thing that is implied in walking is encouragement. As I am developing this faith muscle through the exercise of walking with God, it's preparing me for future service. It'll make me more fit for service. And I'm more effective for the long haul. So, as we said about physical walking, it has the least negative impact on the joints and the most benefit for the heart. That is so true of walking with God. There's no negative impact whatsoever on any part of my faith, and it is so beneficial for my heart. Walking with God implies I won't walk with others. Now, this does not fit with my my walking buddy Teresa, because she and I both are fine with walking with somebody else too, and I'm not jealous of her walking with another person. But God is a jealous God, and He does not want me walking with another God. I have made a choice that I will pursue Him and His righteousness, and that I will have no other gods before me. I will not walk with any other God. And then finally, walking with God implies that I have a strong desire to know Him deeply, intimately, and long term. Just as walking with Teresa means that I know her so much better than I did when we began walking together so many years ago, I know God so much more deeply, so much more intimately, because of this intentionality of walking with Him every single day. Now, I am going to skip down a little bit in our passage to a specific statement in verse 8, where John is saying, if you are not careful to, let me back up and actually read what the concern was. Remember, there are many deceivers that have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ. He says, watch yourselves, verse 8, so that you may not lose what you've worked for, but may win a full reward. Now, that idea of a reward is something that maybe a lot of people don't want us to get too focused on rewards. Just, be a humble servant of God, not worried about the rewards. And that's fine, but at the same time, I am shocked by how many times the New Testament talks about rewards. Rewards, prizes, crowns. It is all over the New Testament, and I got tired of looking them up, and so I settled on a few verses, a few passages that talk about rewards, and I don't know why we would think that there's anything wrong with having our eyes set on a prize, because that is not what God says in His Word. I think it's kind of hilarious that John, who is our writer here, and his brother James had a mom who was really, really all about rewards. She actually cornered Jesus one time to get him to commit to what kind of reward her sons could look forward to. And it's also interesting that we don't read that they were behind her saying, "Oh, Mom, could you please stop talking?" They were kind of into it. So there is so much to look forward to in regards to rewards. There are so many passages, and we can't cover them all, but I'm just going to throw out a few. In the book of Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, he said the reward is going to be great for the person that's persecuted. I mean, that's just going to be a huge thing. He says in Matthew 10, the person who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward. He who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And whoever in the name of a disciple gives to one of these little ones even a cup of cold water, he shall not lose his reward. So there's rewards. Matthew 16, the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. Here we see that rewards are going to be related to what they've done. There will be big rewards and there will be small rewards. And so, thankfully, we will be perfected. The sin nature will be gone, and we won't be jealous that one person got more than the other. We'll be happy for them, and we won't be prideful about our own reward if it's greater. But rewards is something that is very much a big subject in the Bible. Colossians 3:23 and 24 says, "Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive your reward." Philippians 3:14, "I press on towards the goal to win the prize of God's heavenly calling in Christ Jesus." 1 Corinthians 9:24, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way to get the prize." I mean, he's telling us, run like you're going to get first place. Okay? I mean, that's competition. I mean, it's having such an intentionality that we are running all out. Everything within us, we are running. And we know that in Ephesians 2, Paul tells us that we were created by God in Christ Jesus for good works. God prepared them beforehand that we should walk in them. So it's God's way. It's his design. He wants us to walk this way, and he wants to reward us because they glorify God. The way we walk here and now glorifies God now, but also it will bring him much glory in heaven. Now, in verse 9, he tells us about the problem with the concern that John had for that church was this idea of extending hospitality to false teachers. Hospitality is a big deal in the Old Testament times, the New Testament times of the early church. There's a lot of instruction about hospitality, and it was a Middle Eastern custom to be hospitable, just all over the culture. It was the custom to be open, you have your door open for traveling strangers. But specifically within the church, they were encouraged to definitely be have an open door to traveling missionaries and anyone who was sharing the gospel. In the case of these false teachers, this was a warning from John to the church in Ephesus. And he says, refuse hospitality to false teachers. These are false teachers that are coming in the guise of Christianity. They are sharing their the gospel message, but it's been tweaked. It's been changed to an antichrist. They did not believe the truths of Jesus Christ coming in human form, being the Son of God, And so it was a false gospel. And so I think that the advice for us is to be careful about our own endorsements. Be careful what videos that we pass on and endorse and recommend to others. We need to check out their authority, their veracity, their biblical truth. We've got to value truth. We've got to value discernment. And we must be careful not to cause a brother or sister to stumble by endorsing teaching that is false teaching. Finally, for this lesson today, we see that John says, I am writing this letter to you, but I really wish I could be there with you and see you face to face. He loves those people dearly, and face-to-face conversations can be hard conversations. And in this case, this is a hard conversation. But because of love and truth, we should be able to have face-to-face conversations with people where the truth is sometimes challenging. But I want to mention to you the value of face-to-face. UCLA did a study about communication, and they said that 58% of your communication is through body language. Only 35% is through the vocal tone and the emphasis that we give, and a mere 7% is through content of the message. You know, that's just a staggering study and revealing study that face-to-face is so important. I mean, and part of what gets us in trouble on Facebook is we would say things on Facebook or on a text or on an email that we would never say if we were face-to-face. And that's something to think about, that we really, really need to be careful if there's something important that needs to be talked about, go to the time and effort to see another person face to face and hash it out and do it with love and with truth. Okay, see you next time where we will continue in this particular passage.